It started like any other traffic stop: a suspicious car, a missing license plate, two officers doing their job, but within seconds, one of them would be clinging to a moving vehicle, dragged across the street by a fleeing suspect. And that was just the beginning, because what unfolded next, across 4 cities and 3 states, was a series of moments that spiraled far beyond control. One man tried to run, another came back to the scene with an assault rifle, a third ended up dead after a deputy's split-second decision. These weren't isolated incidents, they were flashpoints, where everything boiled over in a matter of seconds. No time to think, no time to breathe, just adrenaline, chaos, and consequences. So what really happened on those streets? And how did these routine encounters turn into full-blown tragedies? Let's break it down, one body cam at a time. It was a quiet summer day when 2 Cleveland officers noticed a silver Infiniti cruising down the street. Nothing major at first, just a missing license plate. They flashed their lights and signaled the car to pull over, and it did. But before the officers could even step out of their cruiser, both the driver and the passenger casually opened their doors and began walking away, like they had nothing to hide. One officer moved toward the driver, a man in red shorts. That's when it happened. The man suddenly bolted. Without hesitation, both officers zeroed in on the fleeing suspect. But while they were distracted, the second man jumped back into the Infiniti, threw it into drive, and peeled off down Kings Highway. It didn't take long for him to circle back, and in a moment that would be replayed over and over, the suspect tried to scoop up his friend mid-chase. The passenger dove into the backseat, but only halfway. His legs made it in, but his upper body was still hanging out of the car. That's when one of the officers grabbed him by the arm, trying to pull him back out, but the driver hit the gas. The officer was dragged several feet before slamming onto the pavement. The Infiniti sped off. No one was arrested that day. Both suspects vanished into the streets. And the officer? He refused medical attention. But while these two vanished into thin air, in Georgia, a different kind of criminal was leaving behind a trail of fake identities and a stolen luxury car. Just 10 days after the Cleveland incident, a Maserati rolled past officers in Atlanta. From a distance, the car looked flawless, sleek, polished, expensive. But one small detail set off alarms. The license plate was barely legible. A routine check, nothing more. At least, that's what it was supposed to be. The officer approached the vehicle and asked for ID. The driver complied. He handed over a license, calm and collected. But when the officer ran the name through the system, something didn't add up. The information didn't match. The ID was fake. When asked to step out of the car, the man didn't argue. He simply waited, and then made a break for it. But this time, the chase didn't last long. Within seconds, he was on the ground, cuffed. Case closed? Not even close. Inside the Maserati, officers found something far more bizarre than they expected. 8 different identification cards, each with a different name and address. But every single one of them had the same face, his. They also discovered a firearm, tucked under a seat, and after running the VIN, it turned out the car had been reported stolen in Atlanta 2.5 months earlier. The suspect was identified as 28-year-old Travinka Smith. By the time officers were done checking the evidence, he was facing charges for auto theft, identity fraud, and possession of a stolen weapon. But unlike the suspects in Cleveland, he didn't vanish into thin air. He just left a paper trail so big, there was nowhere left to run. But the next man didn't run. He returned, not once, but twice. And he brought an assault rifle. It was 11 a.m. on a quiet residential street in Detroit when a black Lexus pulled up to a house on Ferguson Road. No one thought much of it, until the driver stepped out with an assault rifle. Without warning, he opened fire on the home. Bullets tore through the front of the building as terrified residents ducked for cover. Then, just as quickly, the man jumped back into his car and sped off. 3 hours later, he came back. Same car, same weapon, same target. Only this time, someone inside was ready. The homeowner stepped up to the door with a handgun and fired back. The exchange was fast and violent. Bullets punched through the Lexus as the gunman fled once more. Inside the house were 5 adults and 3 children. Miraculously, no one was seriously hurt. The homeowner was hit in the finger, a minor wound, considering what could have happened. That night, police launched a manhunt with a helicopter and ground teams sweeping the area. Eventually, the eye in the sky spotted a figure crouched in thick brush, a man with a weapon, hiding in silence. As officers closed in, he made a run for it. He didn't get far, but what came next turned this already strange case into something darker. The weapon he carried, and the vehicle he drove, were both registered to a former Detroit police officer, 41-year-old Stefan Hood. Hood had served on the force from 2005 to 2013. Now, no one could find him. Witnesses told investigators they'd recently seen the shooter and Hood in a heated argument, a physical fight, just days before. And then, it happened. A few days after the arrest, police found the body of Stefan Hood in a nearby city park. No charges were filed immediately. The investigation was still open, but all signs pointed to one chilling possibility. The gunman may have killed a former cop and used his identity to go on a rampage. But the most tragic chapter was still to come, in Memphis, Tennessee, where a 21-year-old man would end his life in a violent crash after a deadly struggle with a deputy. deputy. Just 6 days before the chaos in Cleveland, a traffic stop was unfolding outside Memphis, one that would end in a fatal shot and a deputy lying broken on the asphalt. It was supposed to be simple. A sheriff's deputy spotted a vehicle he wanted to pull over. Why? That's still unclear. To this day, the officer says he doesn't remember why he initiated the stop, but he did. Inside the car was 21-year-old Jarvian Hadspeth. When the deputy approached, Hadspeth calmly admitted there was a firearm inside the vehicle. That alone raised the stakes. The deputy searched him, then asked him to sit in the patrol car. Hadspeth refused. Instead, he walked back toward his vehicle. The deputy followed, trying to de-escalate, but suddenly, Hadspeth slid into the driver's seat. The deputy reached for the wheel. The car jolted forward, and then, chaos. Hadspeth had one foot on the gas pedal. The other was kicking, trying to shove the deputy out of the moving car. In that instant, the deputy pulled his service weapon and fired a single shot. Both men fell out of the car. Hadspeth, wounded, managed to drive another 800 meters before crashing into a parked car. He was bleeding out. The deputy lay on the road, injured, alone, and unconscious, until a passing woman spotted him and dialed 911. Both men were rushed to the hospital. Only one survived. Jarvian Hadspeth died from the gunshot wound. The deputy survived but was left with serious injuries. As news broke, Hadspeth's family accused the sheriff's office of excessive force. Their lawyer called the shooting reckless and unnecessary, but the sheriff, Floyd Bonner, fired back, calling the accusations a cheap political stunt. And yet, one question haunted the entire situation. Why was Hadspeth stopped at all? The deputy couldn't remember. The incident report didn't clarify, and the answers may never come. One suspect vanished, another was buried, but in each of these stories, one thing remains constant. The line between justice and tragedy is razor thin. 4 cities, 4 incidents, and in each one, a split second made all the difference. A man dragged a police officer with a moving car and vanished without a trace. Another left a trail of fake identities in a stolen Maserati. One returned to a quiet home with an assault rifle and possibly murdered a former cop. And a 21-year-old lost his life after a struggle that no one even remembers the reason for. These weren't isolated. They weren't extraordinary. They're part of a growing wave. Moments where control is lost, where routine encounters detonate into violence. And no matter where you stand, whether you see a suspect, a victim, or an officer doing their job, one thing is certain: nobody walks away clean. Because in the heat of the moment, the truth gets blurred. Eyewitnesses see different stories. Bodycams catch just one angle. And long after the headlines fade, the consequences don't. Justice isn't always black and white. Sometimes, it's just blood on the pavement, and a story that never made the evening news.